My name is Jerome. I'm 58 years old, and I've been a construction contractor in Ohio for over 30 years. I built my business from nothing, starting with a borrowed pickup truck and a toolbox. Everything I have I earned through sweat and determination. I always believed family came first, that blood was thicker than water. But sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who hurt you deepest. Last Tuesday morning, I checked my bank account, like I always do, expecting to see my life savings of $183,000. Instead, I saw $3,200. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and make sure to subscribe, because this story will show you how I turned my son's ultimate betrayal into the most powerful lesson of his life. Let me take you back to where this all began. I started my construction company when I was 25, fresh out of a failed marriage and with nothing but a dream. Back then, I was just another guy with calloused hands and big ambitions. I borrowed $15,000 from my uncle to buy a beat-up Ford pickup and some basic tools. That first year, I lived on peanut butter sandwiches and coffee, taking any job I could find. Roofing, plumbing, electrical work, you name it. I learned every trade because I had to. The business grew slowly but steadily. I specialized in custom homes, the kind where wealthy folks wanted everything perfect. My reputation was built on attention to detail and keeping my word. By the time I was 40, I had 12 employees and was pulling in good money. That's when I met Linda, a nurse at the local hospital. We got married when I was 42, and Marcus came along 2 years later. Marcus was everything to me from day one. Smart kid, curious about everything. I'd take him to job sites on weekends, and he'd ask a million questions about how things worked. Linda used to joke that he'd either become an engineer or drive us crazy with all his questioning. We were a happy family for 10 years. Then everything changed. Linda died in a car accident when Marcus was 12. Drunk driver ran a red light and hit her on her way home from a late shift. I won't go into details, but losing her broke something inside me. Marcus took it even harder. Overnight, this bright, talkative kid became quiet and withdrawn. I had to learn how to be both father and mother to a grieving boy while dealing with my own pain. I threw myself into raising Marcus the only way I knew how, through hard work and discipline. I taught him that nothing in life comes free, that you earn respect through your actions, not your words. I made sure he understood the value of $1 by making him work for his allowance. During summers, he'd work on construction sites, starting with simple tasks like organizing tools and cleaning up. By high school, he could swing a hammer better than some of my experienced workers. Marcus was a good student, better with books than I ever was. He earned a scholarship to Ohio State and studied business administration. I was proud as hell when he graduated. Here was my son, the first in our family to get a college degree. He had opportunities I never had. When he came back home after graduation, I offered him a position in the company. Not as a favor, but because he'd earned it through his education and the summers he'd worked for me. 3 years ago, Marcus married Sarah. She seemed like a nice enough girl, pretty and polite. But she came from a completely different world than us. Her father, William, was a prominent attorney who drove a different luxury car every year and lived in a mansion on the east side of town. During the wedding planning, I got my first real taste of their lifestyle. The wedding cost more than I'd spent on my house. I noticed changes in Marcus after the marriage. He started making comments about money, about how other people lived. He'd mention William's new Porsche or the vacation home in Florida. At first, I thought it was just adjustment to married life, maybe feeling pressure to provide for Sarah the way she was used to living. But the comments became more frequent, and I could sense resentment building. The irony is that I'd been planning for my retirement for years. Every month I put away whatever I could spare. Sometimes it was $500, sometimes $2,000, depending on how business was going. Over the decades, it had grown to $180,000. Not rich by William's standards, but enough for me to retire comfortably and maybe leave something for Marcus and any grandchildren that came along. 2 years ago, my attorney suggested adding Marcus to my bank accounts for estate planning purposes. Made sense at the time. If something happened to me, Marcus could handle my affairs without going through probate. It was supposed to be a safety measure, a way to take care of practical matters. I never imagined it would become the weapon used against me. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I woke up at 5:30, made my coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop to check emails and bank balances. It was part of my daily routine, had been for years. I liked to know where I stood financially before starting each day. The construction business has ups and downs, so I always kept close track of cash flow. I logged into my checking account first. The balance showed $3,218. My heart stopped. I stared at the screen, certain there had to be a mistake. This was my main savings account, the one that should have shown $183,200. I refreshed the page, thinking it was a computer glitch. Same number stared back at me. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through the recent transactions. There it was, clear as day. A wire transfer for $180,000 to Premier Luxury Motors, dated the previous Friday. The authorization showed Marcus Jerome Patterson as the account holder who initiated the transfer. My son's full name right there in black and white. I called the bank immediately, my voice probably betraying my panic. The customer service representative confirmed what I was seeing on screen. Yes, the transfer was legitimate. Yes, it was authorized by a joint account holder. Yes, Premier Luxury Motors was a luxury car dealership in Columbus. No, there was nothing they could do to reverse it without both account holders agreeing. I hung up and just sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The betrayal hit me in waves. This wasn't just about money. This was my son, the boy I'd raised after his mother died, the kid I'd taught to swing a hammer and balance a checkbook, the young man I'd trusted with access to everything I'd worked for. But I'm not the type to fall apart. After the initial shock wore off, anger took over. I needed to know exactly what had happened. I called Premier Luxury Motors and asked to speak with whoever had handled the transaction. A sales manager named David came on the line. "Oh yes, Mr. Patterson," he said when I identified myself. "Your son was very excited about that Porsche, said it was a birthday gift for his father-in-law. Quite generous. Not many young men can afford to buy a 2024 Porsche 911 Turbo S outright like that." $200,000. My son had spent my entire life savings plus financing to buy a car for William. The sales manager went on to mention that Marcus had been with an older gentleman when they picked up the car on Saturday. William, no doubt, probably inspecting his gift and feeling very pleased with his son-in-law's generosity. I drove straight to Marcus's house, my mind racing the entire 20-minute drive. Part of me hoped there was some explanation, some misunderstanding. Maybe it really was a loan. Maybe Marcus had a plan to pay it back. Maybe I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew better. You don't wire someone's entire life savings without asking permission unless you believe you're entitled to it. When I pulled into their subdivision, I could see the new Porsche gleaming in William's driveway, 2 houses down from Marcus and Sarah's place. Midnight blue probably cost more than most people make in 4 years. It was beautiful, I had to admit. But seeing it there, knowing where the money came from, made my stomach turn. I sat in my truck for a few minutes, trying to compose myself. I'd built a successful business by keeping my emotions in check during difficult negotiations. This was just another negotiation, I told myself. But this was my son, and the hurt went deeper than any business deal gone wrong. I knocked on Marcus's front door instead of using my key. This wasn't a family visit anymore. Marcus answered, and I saw the color drain from his face the moment he saw me. He knew. Of course he knew. You don't steal someone's life savings and expect them not to notice. "Dad," he said, stepping back but not inviting me in. "What brings you by? I think you know, son." Sarah appeared behind him, and I could see in her expression that she was part of this too. She didn't look surprised or confused. She looked defiant, like she was ready for a fight. "Can we talk inside?" I asked, though it sounded more like a statement than a question. We sat in their living room, expensive furniture that I now realized Marcus couldn't afford on his salary from my company. Marcus started with the lies just like I expected. "It's temporary, Dad. I was going to talk to you about it. William needed help with a business investment, and I knew you'd want to help family." "A business investment?" I kept my voice level. "David at the dealership said you bought William a Porsche for his birthday." The lie crumbled immediately. Sarah jumped in with her justification. "William has done so much for us, Jerome. He helped us buy this house. He's been like a father to Marcus. It's only fair that we show our appreciation." "With my money." "It's family money," Marcus said, and I could hear William's influence in those words. "You have more than enough. You don't even spend it. It just sits there, earning practically nothing in interest." The entitlement in his voice was like a punch to the gut. This was my son, but he was talking like a stranger. Sarah nodded along, supporting every word. "Besides," Marcus continued, "I'll inherit it eventually anyway. This way, William gets to enjoy the gift while he's alive to appreciate it." That's when I understood how far gone he was. In his mind, my money was already his money. My life's work, my security, my retirement. It was all just his inheritance that he'd decided to access early. "You could have asked," I said. "You would have said no," Sarah shot back. "You don't understand what it's like to be part of a family like William's. There are expectations." Before I could respond, William himself walked through the front door like he owned the place. He had keys, apparently. He looked surprised to see me, but not uncomfortable. If anything, he seemed amused. "Jerome," he said with a condescending smile. "I didn't expect to see you here. Shouldn't you be at work?" "Just came by to talk to my son about a financial matter." "Oh, the Porsche." William waved his hand dismissively. "Generous boy, your Marcus. Though I suppose generosity runs in the family. You've certainly been generous in raising him and giving him opportunities." The way he said it made it clear he considered my contributions to be minimal compared to what he could provide. In his world, I was just the working-class father who'd done his best, but couldn't compete with real wealth and status. "It's a beautiful car," I said. "It certainly is. Perfect choice, too. I've been looking at that exact model for months. Marcus must have been paying attention." That's when Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He counted out $50 and held it out to me. "Here, Dad," he said, like he was tipping a waiter. "This should cover your gas money for the drive over." Sarah giggled. Actually giggled. William smiled wider, clearly enjoying the show. My own son was treating me like hired help, offering me a tip for my trouble, while standing next to the man he'd just bought a $200,000 car for with my money. I looked at that $50 for a long moment. Then I took it. "Thank you, son," I said calmly. "I'll remember this moment." I stood up and walked toward the door. William called after me, "Jerome!" I hope you understand that Marcus was just trying to fit in with the family. No hard feelings, right? I turned back and looked at the three of them. Marcus looked proud of himself. Sarah looked vindicated. William looked like he'd just won a chess game. "No hard feelings," I said. "None at all." I drove home in silence, that $50 bill folded in my shirt pocket. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about respect, about understanding consequences, about learning what family really means. My son needed an education, and I was going to give him one. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, making lists and plans. The betrayal hurt, but I've learned over the years that hurt without action just becomes bitterness. I needed to think strategically the way I approached any major construction project. First, I called my lawyer friend, Tom Bradley, early Wednesday morning. Tom and I had gone to high school together, and he'd handled my business legal matters for 20 years. I explained the situation without emotion, just facts. Legally, Jerome Marcus had every right to access those funds as a joint account holder. But morally and ethically, what he did was theft. You have options, but most of them involve family court and criminal charges. Is that really what you want? I told him I wasn't interested in putting my son in jail. I wanted him to understand consequences in a way that would change his character, not just punish him. "What about the business?" Tom asked. "Does Marcus have any ownership stake?" That's when I realized I held more cards than I'd initially thought. Marcus worked for my company, but he didn't own any part of it. He was an employee, nothing more. I'd never gotten around to drawing up partnership papers or transferring any business ownership. In my mind, that was something we'd do when I was ready to retire. Now I was grateful for the procrastination. I spent Wednesday morning going through all my business documents. Marcus was listed as a key employee and had signing authority on some company accounts for day-to-day operations, but he had zero ownership rights. I could terminate his employment just like any other worker. Thursday, I met with Tom to review my options. He confirmed that I could remove Marcus from the company without any legal complications. He also helped me understand how to remove him from my personal bank accounts and protect my remaining assets. "The question is," Tom said, "what do you want Marcus to learn from this?" "I want him to understand that actions have consequences, that respect is earned, not demanded, that family doesn't mean you're entitled to take what isn't yours. And if he never learns those lessons, then I'll have learned something about my son that I needed to know." I spent the rest of Thursday making phone calls to my key clients. I'd built relationships with these people over decades, and I wanted to make sure they understood that any changes in my company structure wouldn't affect their projects. Most of them had worked with me long enough to know that my word was my bond with or without Marcus. Friday, I met with my banker to remove Marcus from all my accounts and set up new ones with different account numbers. The banker, a woman named Patricia, who'd handled my business for 15 years, was sympathetic but professional. "I'm sorry this happened, Mr. Patterson. We see it more often than you'd think. Family members taking advantage of joint account privileges. I should have been more careful. You trusted your son. That's not a character flaw, it's parental love. But you're smart to protect yourself now." The weekend gave me time to think through exactly how I wanted to handle Monday morning. I wasn't acting out of anger anymore. This was about teaching a lesson that would serve Marcus for the rest of his life, even if he hated me for it in the short term. I also spent time thinking about Linda, wondering what she would have done in this situation. She'd always been better at handling Marcus's emotional needs, while I focused on practical matters like work ethic and responsibility. Maybe if she'd lived, things would have turned out differently. But she hadn't lived, and I'd raised Marcus the best way I knew how. If I'd failed somewhere along the way, I needed to try to fix it now. Sunday evening, I pulled out that $50 bill Marcus had given me. I smoothed it out and put it in a frame on my dresser. Not as a reminder of the insult, but as a symbol of what we needed to rebuild. Respect, understanding, real family values based on mutual care, not financial transactions. Monday morning, I arrived at the construction office at 6:30, an hour earlier than usual. I wanted everything prepared before Marcus showed up for work at 8. I'd already spoken with my foreman, Dave Rodriguez, who'd been with the company for 12 years. Dave knew about the family situation and supported what I was planning to do. "It's not easy, boss," Dave had said, "but some lessons can't be taught with words." I also talked individually with my other key employees over the weekend. I explained that there would be organizational changes and that Marcus would no longer be working for the company. I didn't go into personal details, just said it was a family matter that required this decision. Most of them had worked with Marcus and liked him, but they understood that I owned the business and had the right to make these choices. At 7:45, I called an all-hands meeting in the main office. Everyone gathered except Marcus, who wasn't due in until 8. I kept it brief and professional. Effective today, Marcus Patterson is no longer employed by Patterson Construction. Dave Rodriguez will be taking over his project management duties immediately. If you have any questions about ongoing jobs, direct them to Dave or myself. This is a business decision, and I expect everyone to maintain professionalism. A few guys asked questions, mostly about specific projects Marcus had been overseeing. I had answers prepared for all of them. The transition would be smooth because I'd been involved in every major decision anyway. Marcus had been learning the business, but he hadn't been running it independently. At exactly 8 o'clock, Marcus walked through the office door with his usual confident stride. He was carrying a coffee from the expensive shop downtown, probably a $5 latte. He looked surprised to see everyone gathered in the main office. "What's going on? Safety meeting?" "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice steady and professional. "I need to speak with you privately." He followed me into my office and I closed the door behind us. I'd rehearsed this conversation, but my heart was still pounding. "Effective immediately, your employment with Patterson Construction is terminated." The coffee cup slipped from his hand and hit the floor, sending hot liquid across the carpet. For a moment, he just stared at me, like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "What? You're fired, Marcus. Clean out your desk and turn in your company keys and credit card." "You can't fire me. I'm your son. A son doesn't steal from his father." That's when the anger hit him. His face turned red, and he started yelling about how unfair I was being, how I was overreacting, how family should stick together. I let him vent for about 2 minutes. Then I stood up. "Dave will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings. Your final paycheck will be mailed to your home address." "This is insane, Dad. You're destroying our family over money." "No, Marcus. You destroyed our family when you decided my life savings belonged to you." Dave knocked on the door, right on schedule. I'd asked him to give us exactly 10 minutes before interrupting. Marcus looked back and forth between us, finally understanding that this was really happening. "You'll regret this," he said, as Dave led him toward his desk. Sarah's family will never forgive you for embarrassing us like this. I'm not the one who should be embarrassed. I watched through my office window as Marcus packed his few personal items into a cardboard box. He kept looking back at me, probably expecting me to change my mind or call him back for another conversation. But I'd made my decision, and I was committed to seeing it through. After Marcus left, I called the company's insurance agent and had him removed from all policies. I changed the locks on the office and the equipment storage yard. I updated the company website and business cards to remove his name and contact information. By the end of the day, it was like Marcus Patterson had never worked for Patterson Construction. The hardest part was the phone calls that started around noon. First, Sarah screaming at me about destroying her husband's career. Then William using his lawyer voice to threaten legal action that we both knew he couldn't pursue. Finally, Marcus himself alternating between apologies and accusations, begging for his job back 1 minute and calling me a vindictive old man the next. I didn't answer any of the calls. I let them all go to voicemail and deleted them without listening to most of them. This wasn't about negotiation or discussion anymore. This was about Marcus learning to live with the consequences of his choices. The next 2 weeks were harder than I'd expected, but not for the reasons I'd anticipated. The business ran smoothly without Marcus proving that I hadn't been dependent on him as much as I'd thought. My other employees stepped up to handle the extra responsibilities, and we didn't miss a single deadline or lose a single client. The difficult part was watching my son's life fall apart and knowing I was the one who'd pushed the first domino. Marcus's financial situation became desperate quickly. He'd been living paycheck to paycheck, despite his good salary spending money on things like expensive dinners and vacations to keep up with Sarah's lifestyle expectations. Without income, the house of cards started collapsing immediately. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Marcus was frantically job hunting, but he was discovering what most people in the construction business already knew: reputation matters more than qualifications. Word had gotten around about what happened, and most local contractors didn't want to hire someone who'd stolen from his own father, regardless of the legal technicalities. Sarah's family was not offering the financial support Marcus had expected. William's generosity, it turned out, was limited to receiving expensive gifts, not providing ongoing financial assistance. When Marcus asked for help making their mortgage payment, William suggested they downsize to something more realistic for their income level. The marriage was clearly under strain. Sarah had married Marcus partly because she thought he came from money, having seen the successful construction business and assuming he'd inherit it. Now she was facing the possibility of losing the lifestyle she'd expected, and she wasn't handling it well. 3 weeks after I fired Marcus, he showed up at one of my job sites. He looked terrible, like he hadn't been sleeping or eating well. I was up on a scaffold, working on some detail trim, when I saw him talking to Dave. Dave pointed up at me, and Marcus looked up with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a little boy, asking for forgiveness after breaking something valuable. I climbed down and walked over to where he was standing by his car. Not the new BMW he'd been driving, but an older Honda that I recognized as Sarah's backup car. "Dad, I need to talk to you." "Then talk." "I'm sorry. I know I messed up. I know I should have asked before taking the money, but I can't find work anywhere, and Sarah and I are about to lose the house. Can't we work something out?" It was the first time he'd used the word sorry, but I could tell he still didn't really understand what he was apologizing for. He was sorry about the consequences, not about the action itself. "What would you like me to do?" "Give me my job back. I've learned my lesson." "What lesson is that? That I should have asked first?" Wrong answer. He still thought the only mistake was not getting permission to spend my money on his father-in-law. He didn't understand that the money wasn't his to spend under any circumstances. That family doesn't mean being entitled to someone else's life savings. That respect has to be earned through actions, not demanded through blood relations. I don't think you've learned the lesson yet, Marcus. What else do you want from me? I said I'm sorry. Sorry isn't enough. You need to understand why what you did was wrong, not just regret that it had consequences. I walked away, leaving him standing by his car. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but I knew that giving in too early would teach him that apologies without understanding were sufficient. They weren't. A week later, I learned that Marcus and Sarah had separated. She'd moved back in with her parents, and Marcus was living in a studio apartment across town. William was telling people that Marcus had disappointed the family and was no longer welcome at family gatherings. The irony was heartbreaking. Marcus had betrayed his real family to try to impress a man who dropped him the moment he became inconvenient. He'd traded a father who loved him for a father-in-law who only valued what he could provide. 3 months after I fired Marcus, I was working late in my office when I heard a knock on the door. It was almost 8 o'clock, well past normal business hours. I looked through the window and saw Marcus standing outside in work clothes that looked dirty and worn. I opened the door and stepped back to let him in. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in 3 months. His hands were calloused in new places and he'd lost weight. But there was something different in his expression, something I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. "I've been working for Thompson Construction," he said without any greeting. "Started as a laborer, $12 an hour." Thompson was one of my competitors, a decent enough guy who ran a smaller operation focused mostly on residential repairs and additions. If he'd hired Marcus, it was probably as a favor to me since we'd helped each other out over the years during busy periods. "How's it going?" "It's hard work, harder than I remembered. I forgot what it was like to end the day with your back aching and your hands torn up from handling materials all day." We stood there in silence for a moment. Marcus looked around the office that had once been partially his, seeing it now from the outside. "I've been thinking about what you said about learning the right lesson. I think I'm starting to understand. Tell me. The money wasn't really about the money, was it? It was about respect. I treated you like someone who existed to serve me instead of someone who'd sacrificed to provide for me." That was closer, but I waited for him to continue. And it wasn't just the money. It was everything. I stopped seeing you as my father and started seeing you as an obstacle to the life I thought I deserved. I wanted to impress William and Sarah, and I didn't care what it cost you. Now we were getting somewhere. "Sarah divorced me last month," he continued. "Final papers came through yesterday. William won't return my phone calls. The car got repossessed because I couldn't make payments without a job. I'm living in a place that's smaller than your tool shed." "I'm sorry to hear that." "No, you're not. You're sorry I'm hurting because you're my father and you love me. But you're not sorry I'm learning these lessons because you know I needed to learn them." He was right. I wasn't sorry about the consequences, because they were teaching him what 20 years of comfortable living hadn't been able to teach. "I brought you something," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a crumpled $50 bill. Not the same one he'd given me, obviously, but the symbolism was clear. "I know $50 doesn't come close to what I stole from you, but it's half of my first week's pay at Thompson's. I want you to have it as the first payment toward paying you back." I looked at that bill and felt something shift inside my chest. This wasn't the entitled young man who'd handed me gas money like a tip. This was someone who understood the value of $50 earned through honest work. "Keep your money, Marcus. You need it more than I do. I need to pay you back, all of it, even if it takes me 10 years. The money isn't what I want back. I know. You want your son back. The son you raised to understand right from wrong, to respect his family, to earn what he has instead of taking what he wants. We talked for another hour. Really talked maybe for the first time in years. Marcus told me about the reality of his life now, how he was learning to live within his means, how he was discovering who his real friends were, how he was starting to understand the difference between being liked for what you can provide and being respected for who you are. He also told me about the humiliation of being dropped by William and Sarah the moment he couldn't provide the lifestyle they expected. The man he'd bought a $200,000 car for wouldn't even take his phone calls now. The woman he'd married had moved on to someone with better financial prospects within weeks of their separation. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself for what I did to you, he said as he was leaving. But I want you to know that I finally understand why you did what you did. What's that? You loved me enough to let me fail. Most fathers would have either bailed me out or written me off. You did something harder. You let me experience the consequences of my choices while keeping the door open for me to find my way back. 6 months later, Marcus was still working for Thompson Construction, but he'd been promoted twice and was now running his own crew. Thompson told me that Marcus was one of the hardest workers he'd ever employed, and that he'd learned more about construction in 6 months than some guys learn in 6 years. Your boy's got a good head on his shoulders now, Thompson said when we ran into each other at the supply yard. Whatever you did to straighten him out, it worked. Marcus and I had been meeting for coffee every Sunday morning, slowly rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't the same as before, but it was better in many ways. We talked about real things now, not just surface conversation about weather and sports. He told me about his struggles and his goals. I told him about my own mistakes as a young man and a father. He was still living in the small apartment, but he'd made it comfortable and was proud of what he'd accomplished with limited resources. He was dating a teacher named Amy, who lived in the same building someone who appreciated his work ethic and character rather than his financial status. I want to ask you something, Marcus said during one of our Sunday coffee meetings, and I want you to be completely honest. Shoot. If I could prove to you that I've really changed, that I understand what family means and how to treat people with respect, would you ever consider giving me another chance at the company? I'd been expecting this question for weeks, and I'd given it a lot of thought. What does giving you another chance look like to you? Starting over, bottom of the ladder, earning my way up just like any other employee. No special treatment because I'm your son, if anything held to a higher standard. And if I said yes, what would you want to prove, and how would you prove it? I'd want to prove that I can be trusted with responsibility again, that I can put the company's interests ahead of my own ego, that I can work alongside guys I used to supervise without creating problems or resentment. Those were good answers, but I had one more question. And what if I said no? What if I decided that some bridges can't be rebuilt? Marcus thought about that for a long moment. Then I'd respect that decision. I'd be disappointed, but I'd understand it. And I'd keep working to be the kind of son you could be proud of, whether I worked for you or not. That was the answer I needed to hear. He wasn't asking for his job back out of desperation or entitlement. He was asking for a chance to earn it back, and he was prepared to accept no for an answer. Tell you what, I said, Thompson's busy season is winding down. If he can spare you for a few weeks, why don't you come work for me as a day laborer, minimum wage, no benefits, no promises. Let's see how it goes. The smile that crossed his face was worth more than any $200,000 a car. Marcus started the following Monday, arriving earlier than anyone else and staying later than everyone else. He worked harder than he had to ask thoughtful questions and treated every task like it mattered. More importantly, he treated his co-workers with respect, even the ones who'd been his subordinates before. Dave Rodriguez pulled me aside after Marcus's first week back. I don't know what happened to that boy during his time away, but he's not the same person who left here. He's learned something. After a month, I offered Marcus a permanent position as a crew supervisor, the same level he'd been at 3 years earlier when he'd first joined the company. After 6 months, I made him a project manager again. But this time, he earned every promotion through performance, not nepotism. We also worked out a repayment plan for the money he'd stolen. Marcus insisted on paying back every penny, despite my offers to forgive the debt. He calculated that at his current salary, setting aside 25% for repayment, it would take him 8 years to repay the full amount. 8 years is fine with me, he said. It'll remind me every month for 8 years not to take things that don't belong to me. A year after Marcus came back to work, Amy accepted his marriage proposal. They were planning a small wedding they could afford without going into debt. Marcus asked me to be his best man, and when I agreed, he broke down crying right there in my office. I know I don't deserve a second chance, he said, but I'm grateful for it every single day. The wedding was nothing like his first one. Maybe 40 people, mostly family and close friends. No expensive venue, no luxury cars in the parking lot. William wasn't invited, but it was full of love and genuine happiness in a way the first wedding had never been. During his speech at the reception, Marcus pulled out a framed $50 bill and showed it to the guests. This represents the worst moment of my relationship with my father, he said. The day I handed him $50 like a tip after stealing his life savings. But it also represents the moment my real education began. My father could have had me arrested. He could have written me off and moved on with his life. Instead, he loved me enough to let me learn from my mistakes. That $50 taught me more about family respect and character than any amount of money could ever buy. He turned to me with tears in his eyes. Dad, I know I can never undo what I did, but I promise you that I'll spend the rest of my life proving that your faith in me wasn't misplaced. As I write this, Marcus has been back with the company for 3 years. He's one of my best project managers and is starting to take over more of the day-to-day operations as I gradually prepare for retirement. Real retirement this time, the kind where I hand over the business to someone I trust completely. The relationship between Marcus and me is stronger now than it's ever been. We went through fire together and came out on the other side with a deeper understanding of what family really means. It's not about money or inheritance or what you can do for each other. It's about love that persists through mistakes, respect that's earned through actions, and forgiveness that comes after genuine change. That $50 bill still sits framed on my dresser, but now it represents something different. Not humiliation or betrayal, but transformation and hope. It reminds me that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is to let them experience the consequences of their choices. And it reminds Marcus that real wealth isn't measured in luxury cars or impressive gifts, but in relationships built on mutual respect and genuine care. Amy is pregnant with their first child, my first grandchild. Marcus comes by every Sunday to help with projects around my house and to talk about becoming a father. He asks questions about raising children with strong values, about balancing love and discipline, about teaching respect without breaking spirit. I want to be the kind of father you were to me, he told me recently. Strong enough to set boundaries, wise enough to know when to enforce them, and patient enough to wait for understanding to grow. You'll be a good father, Marcus. You've learned the most important lesson that love sometimes requires difficult choices. Sarah remarried within a year of their divorce, choosing a man whose family had old money and social connections. I heard she's happy with her lifestyle, and I genuinely hope that's true. Everyone deserves to find their path to happiness, even if it's not the path I would choose. William still drives that Porsche, though I suspect he's forgotten where it came from by now. Men like him tend to see generosity as their due, rather than as gifts to be remembered and appreciated. As for me, I've learned something valuable too. I learned that being a father doesn't end when your children become adults. It evolves into something deeper and more complex, requiring different kinds of wisdom and different kinds of strength. I learned that sometimes loving someone means disappointing them in the short term to help them grow in the long term. Most importantly, I learned that the love between a parent and child can survive almost anything if both people are willing to do the hard work of forgiveness and change. Marcus and I lost each other for a while, but we found our way back to something even better than what we'd had before. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to teach someone you love an important lesson? How did you find the strength to let them face consequences when every instinct told you to protect them? Share your story in the comments below, because we all learn from each other's experiences. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of the importance of family values, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about love loss and redemption. And don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear that second chances are possible when they're earned through genuine change. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that the most valuable gifts we can give our children aren't material things, but the wisdom to make good choices and the strength to learn from their mistakes. Until next time, take care of your families and hold on to what really matters.